Hi, Richa. Good evening.
Hi,
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Thanks for joining in. So you're based out of Mumbai, I guess?
Yes, I'm based out of Mumbai.
Great.
And to begin with, I was very inquisitive about led you to this
Yeah.
uh, books wale Bhaiya. This very interesting title.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you want to understand the reason why I named it like this?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Interestingly, in my last interview, also, I wish Thamija, I was asked this question. So, nothing special. I just wanted to have a name with an Indian taste, which gives a
Mm-hmm.
desi feeling. And I thought on similar lines. And I had this Kitabi Kida and all in mind, but they were very cliched names. And
Sure.
so I had to decide between Kitaabi Baatein and Books Wale Bhaiya. And so
Mm-hmm.
Kitaabi Baatein is under which I take the interviews, and Books Wale Bhaiya is the name of a channel. So just wanted to have some desi look and feel.
Wonderful. I'm all for Desi.
Of course, that's very much visible in your books as well, with a lot of desi twist. So I think people are joining in. We can probably join in a minute or so. We can, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
start with the interview in a minute or so. And before that,
Sure.
how is it going on in Mumbai? How is the weather?
Good. We've just been stuffing us. It's raining incidentally. The monsoons are reluctant to leave us this
Yeah,
season. This year I don't know why. So
right,
it's continuously raining,
right.
and yeah, we've had a good long weekend stuffing our faces because there was the Shera as well as Durga Puja, and I'm
Right,
married to a Bengali, so there's been a lot of food and not too much exercise, not
of course.
no writing at all. So yeah, it's
Great.
it's been a it's been a mixed bag, but a good weekend. How about
Right.
you?
It's great. It's raining in Delhi as well since the morning. So
Mm-hmm.
not much going out. It's been
Mm-hmm.
raining. It's the monsoons have ended, but seems like it's Delhi is still experiencing rains. It happened a couple of weeks back also on a Saturday again. It rained heavily, and today also we are seeing the same scenario. It's raining and not a great idea to at least spend the time outdoors. But let's hope it's
Nice.
short-lived only because it's the onset of winter anyway. So,
Yeah, at least you're gonna have a winter. We're gonna have none of that. We're gonna pretend to have a winter when it's
well, Mumbai doesn't have. I really love Mumbai.
yes.
That I'm not a winter person at all. I prefer summer season any day. And that's one of the reasons I love the city of Mumbai.
Nor is my father actually. It's the only time he chooses to come to Bombay. Otherwise, he can't stand the
Yeah.
weather. But he loves
Okay.
he chooses to be with us only during this time. So yeah, you share that with him.
Great. All right. I think some people have joined, so I think we can probably start. So, again, so hello and welcome everyone to Kitaabi Baatein. I'm Abhishek, also known as Books Wale Bhaiya. And my guest today is Richa S. Mukherjee. She is an author of 4 novels and a couple of e-singles and a book on poetry. And just to give a brief introduction of her, so she is a writer and a poet. She's an ex-journalist and advertising professional, and she bade farewell to other, career opportunities after finding a purpose in, telling stories. Her first book was interestingly a collection of poems, which was titled The Pawn Shop of Prose, and after which she wrote a first novel I did not expect to be expecting, which was a take on accidental pregnancy. Then she moved to writing thrillers. She wrote Kanpur Khufia Private Limited. Then she wrote another book called Excess Baggage, and her latest book is again related to Kanpur Khufia. So I'll show you some of her books. The Curse of Kuldhara, which is her latest book, and then we have Kanpur Khufia, which is, as I said, these two are thrillers, and one of her books is Excess Baggage. So these are what I have in my possession right now. So Richa, this
Wow,
is more
lovely.
like a professional profile. What you did earlier, you moved to writing and what
Mm-hmm.
your books. But what about you as a person? So if you were to describe yourself in your own words,
Oh, you see, brevity is not my strong suit, which is why writers tend to write novels
right?
because it's very hard to condense yourself into a few words. But I
Of
have
course.
always considered myself a bit of a nomad, Abhishek,
Okay.
because I think ever since I was born, I've constantly been in motion. My father was
Right.
in the government services, so every 3 4 years, not because I was a badly behaved child, but just because we just had to move. And
Oh,
a lot of people ask me now, saying that we live in times which are where we're very careful about each other's mind space and physical space, and just incidentally, day before, somebody asked me, how did you move so much? How did it feel? I said, we were four of us. I had
mhm.
three elder sisters, and we were a large family. And I don't even think it was a topic of discussion. It was something that was just a part of our lives,
Part of our
this
lives.
constant movement. So,
Right,
I don't think we cogitated as much as we do these days, or as much as I do.
right,
All I knew was, we were changing schools, meeting new people, adjusting to different situations. And even though I can't say change is fun at all points in time, especially when it comes to children and
right,
adjusting to new environments. But having said that, I guess I had the boon of not over intellectualizing what I was doing. I just went along and flowed on with the situation. And what it did was it helped me acquire on perspective, in terms of how to just watch people from afar, just observe people, because that is what I
right.
had to constantly do to acclimatize myself to different
Of course.
situations. I always had
Right,
this parallel track running in my head, which was about, listening to people and gathering information, which would enable me to participate in conversations. So
right.
I feel as if the writer in me was marinating. I had no
Mhm.
burning ambition. My family was always into a lot of, there was a lot of, obviously I'm from the north, so I'm from UP, so there were a lot of civil servants around, and that was just
Yes.
that was the environment, and there was a lot of ambitions in that regard as well. But we somehow willy nilly went about with our parents and chose our own professions, and there was a lot of travel and storytelling. This is the kind of, and music and dance, because I'm the black sheep of the family. I don't play any instrument, but my
Right,
mom was like a Kathak and a Sangeet Visharad. My dad, I used to ask him often, saying that you're training for civil services. Where the hell did you find time to play six instruments? But he does. So do my sisters. So it was this kind of very eclectic, interesting,
right,
stimulating environment that I was, born and brought up in. I think I didn't have much of a personality then, but I think I was just absorbing and accumulating. So yeah, I think because we were moving in that kind of experimentation, kind of, I think percolated down to my choices in terms of careers as well, because I wasn't thinking too hard. I thought there would always be civil services, but then when I finished college, I was experimenting, and then I thought about journalism. So I
right.
was a journalist, a broadcast journalist for a bit. Then after that, I moved into, I did my MBA. Then I got placed with an advertising agency, and my father asked me, "What an utter waste of money. Why did the hell did I, finance your MBA when you had to go and join an ad agency?" And I said, "Listen, this is where my heart took me." So anyway, I was happily in advertising as well for about 10 years. So, along the way, I can't even look back and say this was my happiest time, because
Mhm.
I honestly enjoyed every milestone, every profession I was in, all the people I was meeting, all the experiences I've had along the way. And that, I think, an accumulation of all of that has helped me dip my pen into all sorts of experiences and
Right,
produce the kind of stories that I
right,
do.
right.
So, not in a nutshell, in a very large, in a very long format, that is essentially, the influences I was surrounded by and what led me to eventually
Right.
writing.
Right. So a lot of, I would say, great experiences in since your childhood in terms of moving around, meeting new people, and you took up a career in advertising and before that journalism. And then how did, I mean, I understand from your experience, how did writing happen? I mean, the day you decided that, you want to be a writer and you started writing. So any special moment which triggered that, or was it something just going on in your mind and just one fine day you started doing it?
Funnily enough, Abhishek, all my writing, I guess, epiphanies have happened as at the end of a very traumatic experience. So initially, when
Oh,
I was a child, I started writing poetry because I used to miss my father a lot, and he was travel, and I didn't know how to express myself. So I
hmm.
started writing, these four
Ah,
line
okay.
rhyming sequences, and I used to write
Right.
only because I used to cry and miss him a lot. And when I started writing my novels, so I wrote poetry for quite a while. And then I realized there were other interesting things happening around me. So I was a constant reader. I read voraciously through life. I had my sisters and my father and my mother who were, influencing and bringing to me all kinds of literature from, from all around the world. So I continuously read. But the other time, so I stopped writing poetry then, because
Mhm.
I guess I was fascinated by just growing up and what was happening around me. But then again, when I was in the middle of my maternity break, and this is when there were, let's just say, first initial motherhood, that patch is always a bundle of experiences and emotions.
Of course.
So let's just say I was going through an interesting patch emotionally, and at that point in time, I remember this one moment when I just picked up a diary and a pen, and I just saw that this whole bunch of events is unfolding around me, none of
Right.
which I have any control over.
Control.
So something sparked in my head, and I think there was a lot of fodder around me, and that is what I channelized into my first book. So it was
First,
incidentally about accidental pregnancy.
accidental
I didn't
pregnancy.
expect to be expecting. And my husband later blamed me. He said, "You make it seem as if everything we did was accidental, and that you didn't enjoy it." I said, "No, nothing of the sort. I just, the idea came from there, the
Right.
spark. But yes, the rest of it was, yeah, I guess it's interesting."
Right.
And I keep talking about the fact that because I had no grand ambitions of being an author, because I had no idea of who my ideal reader
Mm.
is, or who my publisher would be. I think that process was very devoid of any kind of stress, and it was unencumbered. And for me, it was
Right.
pretty cathartic to just move away from everything and write.
Right.
So because of that, I guess I enjoyed it so much that I finally decided that I would write a second book. Otherwise,
Right.
I didn't think I had the wherewithal or the techniques or any kind of discipline to even come to a second book. But
Right.
I think because I enjoyed the first book so much, I had to write the
Right.
second one as
And
well.
and as that was your first book, so any challenge you faced in terms of approaching publishers, and of course everyone would like to have the book published as soon as possible with preferably very reputed known publishers. So any challenges you faced as a first time writer?
Oh, absolutely. Because that there's this gnawing feeling which feels, as I can describe it, as dread, as constant dread. Whenever you come back to the writing table, and
Right.
whenever you face a rejection, it feels like such a punch to your gut.
Right.
It's an emotional punch,
Of
because I
course. Of
had
course.
been in advertising, and I was always in. So people assume now that I was in the creative, and I wasn't. I wasn't wearing the jholas and wearing those loose kurtas, and
Right.
asking my creative counterparts to wear something appropriate to go to the client and present. I was the suit. I was in the other end. So
Right.
I was account management. So I was always at the cusp of the creativity and channelizing the briefs and getting all the instructions from the just trying to deliver the product,
Right.
and writing the unfortunate scripts that nobody else wanted to. But
Right.
I never ever thought that I would be doing this. So
Okay.
uh, yeah, I mean, eventually, when it comes to writing something for yourself, and this is something I learned to appreciate later, it's you're slicing a part of yourself and placing it for
Of course.
judgment in front of other
Of course.
people. And creative content, whether it's art, whether it's something written, whether it's performance, you are putting so much of yourself into it, and then you're just asking people, will you like me, do you like me,
Right.
will that change the way I interpret how I am, how I am as a person. It changes everything, and
Of
it's so
course.
subjective the way it's consumed. So I know it's scary. And that is when when the first time I sent in an entry for the short story, because I didn't even jump into a novel. I knew I had one novel languishing on the side, but I started writing short stories and
Okay.
poetry, and I started writing it again, and I submitted it to a couple of these South Asia anthology submissions, and then
Okay.
there was some other contests. And I remember every single time he said, "Thank you for participating." But, I just felt that familiar dread in the stomach. And I said, "It's okay, no
Right.
problem, no problem. I'm
No
not even
problem.
thinking about a book."
Right.
But then eventually, it just so happened that I participated in this Times of India writing contest, which is a very interesting contest that happens every year. They give you a prompt, and then you're supposed to write around it.
Mm.
And I'd never written romance. For that matter, I hadn't written pretty much of anything. I was just trying to figure out my own voice at that point in
Right.
time. And I participated. I came in the top 10, and I happened to meet Ravinder Singh. And I remember, with this cringy expression on my face, I went up to him, said, "I might have a book. I heard you have a publishing house. Would you be interested?" So I was making this face constantly. So I don't even
Right.
know how he humored me and spoke to me at that point in time. But he said, "Why don't you send in your entry?" So I did. And it was a horrendously long manuscript. I kid you not, it was to give you a perspective. You know that contemporary fiction is anywhere, or fiction, that space, if not literary fiction, and it's anywhere in the vicinity of 50,000 to 70,000 words at best. You know, to
Right.
price yourself at that
Right.
acceptable, that cost acceptable price range.
Right.
And I had written 250,000 words, thinking I was God knows
That's
what of the publishing world. You know, the next big thing has
right.
arrived, and I was told, this is hideous. Can you please slice it down to 1/4 of what you've written? So,
That's
yeah,
close to
that's
like
how it
more than
started.
5 times the usual
Yeah, absolutely.
word count.
So,
Yeah.
this is how it started. But before that, I had done my due diligence once I decided that I really wanted to publish, and why should it just lie around? So, while
Right.
I was waiting for this response, I went online, I checked all the big publishers, I did my research in terms of what they are publishing. I went to the bookstores and I checked. I looked around at authors. I looked around at commissioning editors online, and I was making all my submissions ready. And I had started approaching the publishers, and that is when it happened. So I did my due diligence, and I had a whole bunch of rejections when it came to my short stories and everything else. But thankfully, I got a foot in at the right time. And then when I
Right.
heard that HarperCollins was part of, he said, I still remember, he said, would you mind if HarperCollins comes on board? And I remember being gobsmacked and wondering, why is he asking me if I would
Asking.
mind?
Right.
So I said, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it just happened fortuitously. But having said that, I don't think I have been deprived of any of that dread or any of that rejection or any of those debilitating feelings that, anybody who writes
Right.
goes through. So
Right.
that's how it happened.
Great. And in all your 4 books, whether it's like, for example, none of them all got different books, but humor pretty much is a part of every book. So, any intention is this what you is what is the case with your life as well? You would describe yourself as someone who wants to make people laugh, or how come it became a part of all kind of books? Because all your books are different, but it's an essential part of all your books.
So I discovered this about myself, Abhishek. I had no intentions of making anybody laugh. I was called Mother Melancholy as a child, because my sisters would look at me and just say, what are you brooding about? I was constantly brooding. So,
Mm-hmm.
like I told you, I wasn't a very interesting personality as a child. But what I mentioned to you in terms of the movement and the experiences and me constantly observing people, I think it was a survival mechanism to have a sort of a parallel track happening in my head to view the
Right.
idiosyncrasies of people and life. You know how Ruth Rendell and Agatha Christie always, and P.G. Woodhouse always write about the comedy of life and the comedy of manner. So for me, it was all about observation, and it came from them. And of course, I come from a family of masaledar storytellers and raconteurs. Like, everything has to be a story.
Right.
So I think all of these influences came together. And when I started writing, so initially, whether it was poetry or short stories, I had to reach a point where I decided that after a certain amount of time, that the long format that I write, I tend to gravitate towards humor, and that
Mm-hmm.
is what comes naturally to me.
That's good.
And the more I experimented with that, the more I felt a certain comfort level and an ease of
Of
writing.
course.
So that is how it and at that point in time, like I told you, when I wrote my first book, it wasn't intentional. I was just trying to channelize all the comedic and interesting things that were happening around me
Right.
during that phase. So through the passage of writing that book, that is when I discovered that, okay, this is interesting. And somehow what humor does, Abhishek, is that it allows you to put forth certain interesting viewpoints, certain controversial viewpoints,
Right.
thought-provoking things, without, I guess, upsetting people. I mean, and that is also debatable now, because everything tends to upset people, even if you
Right.
breathe too harshly now.
Of
But
course.
so I felt empowered in that sense, because it was allowing me to say many meaningful things without offending anyone. So humor
Right.
is that kind of tool, and if you use it in a judicious and well balanced manner, then it's very, very interesting, and it's very I guess the canvas is vast, because
True. True.
as I incidentally found out, even with thrillers, because I've always loved the genre, whether it's thrillers or horror or any of this. And I just realized that, why don't I expand? Because at the time I wrote Kanpur Khufia Private Limited, I knew that I was I was happy to write humorously, but here I was talking about a thriller. I'm talking about bringing two absolutely contrasting genres together. One that is
Right.
supposed to provide comic relief and one that is supposed to make you dread, and feel
Right.
fear.
Right. Right.
So I wasn't a seasoned writer. I was starting my second book, and here was a challenging prospect of bringing these contrasting emotions together,
Right.
and trying to keep true to the desiness of this character that I was trying
Right.
to conjure. So it was absolutely new territory for me, but it was fantastic because wasn't I was able to challenge myself. It happened inadvertently because I picked these genres and because
Right.
I tend to write humorously.
Right.
And again, I was continuously able to, through Kanpur Khufia Private Limited, through Excess Baggage, through Curse of Kuldhara, every single time, I think if you, there's certain things which are a given when it comes to my books, which is very strong characters. And I'm not just talking about female characters because I have to be dispassionate as a writer. It's a gender neutral world for me. It is about what belongs to the story and who belongs to the story and how interesting their background and their
Of
characterization
course.
needs to be. But by virtue of the fact that I am who I am and I've grown up with the influences I have, there are a lot of strong female characters.
Right.
It's very earthy and massy in a way, but because of the way I write humorously, it allows me to, I guess, seed without being too, without making the exercise too contrived. Seed,
Right.
some interesting, thoughtful, thought-provoking messages in my stories, while telling an entertaining and interesting story. And that's possibly, I wouldn't say it's a formula because I try not making my writing formulaic, but that is why I guess a lot of screen adaptation agents also gravitate
Yes.
towards the stories because
Yes.
I don't try to over intellectualize or bracket or label what I write. It's wholesome, it's entertaining, it's about various social milieux in the country, and
Yes.
it is not just about city slickers. And I think that is something that is, I guess, creates traction with people and with people who are looking to make
Of
these
course.
kind of stories.
Of course. And one question related to four books. So what I noticed in your first novel, you talked about unexpected pregnancy, about a typical urban, Mumbai couple. You talked about then you moved to writing, thrillers. You created a character, Prachand Tripathi, a detective. Then you talked excess baggage. You talked about finding yourself, the soul searching, and a mother-daughter relationship. So if with four novels, how do you manage to write on such varied things, varied characters? How come in four books there's so much of variety? How did you manage to do that?
I appreciate that you have observed this and you have picked up on this because what tends to happen is when you write in a particular genre, you get, I guess, stereotyped in a certain way.
Yes.
But I think what people forget is that while writing might come naturally to you,
Yes.
dipping into your own world and drawing from your own world becomes very repetitive and boring for many writers. And as writers, I think anybody who writes, whether it's short stories, whether it's novels, I think we want to experiment with a variety of writing
Yes.
formats and a variety of stories. But also, what I try and do is, the challenges that have come my way are the fact that I have to write in a simplistic fashion because I'm writing to a particular audience. That doesn't mean that I'm trying to change my voice, but I want to create
Right.
accessible, interesting stories,
Yes.
which means I need to keep it simple. I need to keep it earthy because that is, the kind of zone I write in. But the ideas I don't, but the setting of these and the stories and the themes of these stories, I try not restricting myself.
Right.
So I would like to look back and intellectualize and say, okay, this is what happened. This is what happened. I'm telling you, Abhishek, most of these story ideas have come from a very impulsive and and in the moment kind of idea.
Right.
Whether I didn't expect to be expecting is something that I heavily drew from my own life, so much so
Right.
that my mom-in-law called me up and said that which one am I? Am I the cantankerous one or the other one? Because I see some shades of myself. So I
Yes.
borrowed heavily because autobiography, when you're
Mm.
writing your first book, you are just grasping at straws and you're just looking around for
Of
available
course.
stimulus, right? So even my husband complains because his German boss picked this up at the airport, a copy, And once he read it on the flight, he got off the flight. He said, Anirban, I know too much about you, more than I'd like to know, because I've put a lot of myself in, my environment there. But Kanpur Khufia Private Limited happened because I was visiting Kanpur and I saw this detective agency called Foxy Detectives. And that's the way it was written in Hindi. I just laughed. It was so funny because it had a fox maid and, this with a magnifying glass. It was hilarious. And something just happened over a plate of chaat. Something just came together and I started writing down the characters. So a lot of people would, purists would possibly frown on this methodology. But for me, what's more important is the story comes to me as a one-liner. And a lot of people go into the specifics of the story first. For me, it's my characters. So before I can even get down to fleshing out the story, for me, what suffices is a one-liner encapsulation of what the story is about, what the basic premise and theme is. And then I start working in the characters. So the characters came to me first. For excess baggage, it was a conversation I had with a friend of mine when we were going to Spain, and she just happened to come to me and say that she was talking about an unfortunate experience because she had just been through a divorce. And that just got me thinking that, it is treated as a plague of society and something, which an unfortunate event in life, which changes your life forever, and you can never, you can never ever continue with your life, in a normal manner after this. And things started brewing. I was on a flight. It sounds, too simplistic, in fact, but it all came together. The fact that I was taking a trip, the fact that, I was talking about this girl who had just been divorced, and it all fell together there. And Kanpur Khufia, A Curse of Kuldhara, obviously, the second installment came from a very, it felt like it was unfinished business with Kanpur Khufia Private Limited. I felt like, there were more adventures to be had, and the characters were loved so much that I felt that I think there were more stories to tell. So then it was scary for me to bring him out of Gwaltoli, because that's another hard decision for me to make, because all the readers were invested in Kanpur, and all the characterizations and all the picturizations I'd done with Kanpur and all the storytelling from there. But I've always been fascinated with the paranormal. So I thought, what better destination than Kuldhara to, bring one more genre to the fold.
Right. So with the paranormal, and so you plan to write more on, you want to keep on writing like this with a variety of genres, or would you like to stick to, say, detective fiction or maybe paranormal? So can you expect something like a mystery or horror stories as your next book?
I don't think I could ever purely stick to one genre, because I think I'm too temperamental a writer, Abhishek, and I get bored too easily. So to surprise myself, to challenge myself, I think I'll continue. My gut has got me so far, and I'm hoping it navigates me to better and funner and interesting places. And I think I'll continue experimenting. But sometimes you have to pause, because now, initially I used to get very irritated with the fact that people would tell me that because after Kanpur Khufia Private Limited, I wanted to write. There's this one subject, one particular story that I've been ruminating about, that's been at the back burner for a very long time. And I thought it was the right time. Now the 2 books were out. That was the right time to get it out. And I was advised that you're building a brand of yourself. People buy into the author as much as they do your work. So it's important to stay a certain course. It's not about labeling, it's not about stereotyping. So while I continue experimenting, people need to understand the style of my writing. It's the same familiarity you seek whenever you go and buy a familiar product, or when you go to a bookshelf and even the book stalkers are stocking the books. They need to where to place you. You can't be all over the place. So while I do understand that I will never stick to a particular genre, and I tend to mix, genres up, I like the fact that I'm able to write them, and the fact that I'm able to merge them, but my voice stays consistent. So I will be writing in the same, I guess, comedic way, but I'll keep experimenting with genres and when that serious book I'm talking about is out, maybe we can have a chat again and I'll tell you, see, I finally managed to do it after a certain number of books.
And other than the variety of genres, we can also notice variety in terms of the kind of cultures and also representing. So we had Mumbai in, I didn't expecting, then we had the Punjabi culture, the in excess baggage, and then we moved to UP, and you are from UP, so I think that might be one of the reasons. So are we likely to have this more of Indian cultures and societies tour in your books in the future as well, or you would like say
Absolutely, because
stick to
it's
UP? Or
no, absolutely, because
hmm,
the fact that they've come up, I love the fact that we say it's incredible India. It's incredible in every possible way. I mean,
absolutely
it is so fascinating. That canvas is so vast. We're
true.
talking about stimulus where which changes every 200 kilometers. Why would I have to look far? And for me,
Right.
every time I'm going through this process of learning about a community, about the culture, about the folklore, something I tremendously enjoyed while writing Curse of Kuldhara was because it happened during the pandemic. I was writing it during the pandemic. I couldn't really go to Kuldhara, even though I had booked myself in along with my sister in these lovely havelis, and I was going to get a sense of the place and write it, surrounded by immersing
Right.
myself in this environment. But again, the pandemic happened, and my research was, a filter. It kind of it came down to just speaking with people again and buying a number of books which spoke about the legends and the lore and the folk stories and all of that, and it was fantastic. And then
Right.
because I was right, I picked up a lot of to sound authentic. Even when I was doing excess baggage, I didn't just speak to the Sindhi friends. I actually learned a little bit of Sindhi. Then when I
Okay.
was writing Curse of Kuldhara, I learned a lot of the expressions in Marwari. So for me, I think this is part of the process. It's not
I
just
love
putting down
that.
the story. It's about immersing yourself in that community and always just looking back and trying to find an authentic voice, an authentic
Right.
representation. So even for excess baggage, I wrote about the partition, but I read about 5 books about the partition because I wanted to understand the partition from an elderly person's point of view, because somebody who's a second third generation will think of it very differently and the children
Right.
will think of it very differently.
Of course.
So does it reflect in every page of excess baggage? Absolutely not. But did it help me uh, you know represent her point of view and write her character better and understand her mindset better? Definitely. So
Of course.
I think learning about communities and cultures, and there's so much left for me to explore in India that yeah, you'll find my eventually, I'm hoping at the end of 10 years I'll have one book from every state. I think
Oh, that sounds wonderful. That sounds
yeah.
wonderful.
So
And you also wrote a couple of free singles with Ravinder. So how has that experience been? Writing with a very accomplished and a very well-known writer. How has that experience been?
again, that was an experiment that we, among the plethora of experiments all of us indulged in during the pandemic. This was an
Yeah.
experiment as well, where there was these e-singles he was writing for HarperCollins.
Yeah.
And, we thought, why not? Because, I've known him a while now, and he's been a mentor and a publisher. He's a co-publisher for me even now. And there is a certain level of understanding. There's a degree of comfort, and these are basic requisites when you are embarking on a journey where writing is so subjective and it can be such a sticky process that if you're not on the same footing with someone, if you're not on the same wavelength with someone, there's going to be discord for sure. So
Of
what we were
course.
clear about was, that we were to do a couple of stories. We pooled in our ideas. Once we had the ideas fleshed out, then we kind of split it up in terms of the labor, in terms of who would write which portions, or if I'm writing primary portions of this one, he would write primary portions of the other one, and then we would just kind of look at each other's work and make it a collaborative process, because his voice and his writing style is different from mine. And
Right.
while I was telling him that we can't kill people at the end, he was telling me that we can't murder people as well, because his love story, somebody dies, and my
Right.
murder story, somebody dies. So he said, we have to tread the
Right.
middle ground here. So let's
Yeah.
not indulge ourselves as writers, and let's try find it interesting. So we did one
Yeah.
called the Runaway Groom, which was about it was a funny love story about it was a sad story. It was a sad love story, but it was written in a funny way. Then there
Amazing.
was another one called Love Bites. One had to be
Yeah.
from the pandemic. You can't come out of a pandemic and not, base one of your stories. So one was about, music and
Right.
celebrating music and romance and all of that during the setup. And one was a very, very sad story where I didn't kill someone as promised. So it was an experiment, and I haven't purely written romance anywhere. And this was a first for me. And again, because I love challenging myself, it was interesting. We received a lot of great feedback. In fact, we were just recently talking about it, that there's been so much of a clamor for, you know, the second half of all these stories, because they all were left in a, you know, in a lurch, because it never really concluded. It was left open to interpretation. It never really concluded. None of the stories. So then maybe there will be part twos coming out.
Great.
We were discussing it recently.
Yes.
So that was fun. It was interesting.
That's great. So as you mentioned at the beginning, you have always been a voracious reader. So who are your favorite authors or favorite books, if you would like to share?
So as hard as it to get me to zip up and shut up, this is one question where I always hem and haw and go into, you know, long pauses, because, you know, I've read such an immense body of work that it's very hard, because I'm someone who's pretty much read every single genre. I can't even stick to one genre when it comes to reading. So very early influences were a lot of the classics. My dad handed me an Anton Chekhov play when I was 8 years old, but I couldn't even understand what was going on. So I've read a lot of stories coming from the scriptures, because my dad used to read a lot of the Veds and Upanishads and the Ramayana and Mahabharata. I've, you know, Kamala Das was somebody, you know, so I had very eclectic and weird taste, you know, not for my age at that particular point in time. But then I got hooked on to, I've read a lot of your Panchatantras and, you know, those, the children's literature was, in fact, I turn to children's literature even now, because I think it's a very simple, but very evocative and thought-provoking space, you know, where the biggest of lessons in life can be delivered in such a sweet and honest way. So I turn to children's literature even now. I think Rabindranath Tagore has been a great influence. Munshi Premchand, I used to read a lot of his stories. I read a lot of, you know, these illustrated classics my dad used to get for me. Charles Dickens, Huckleberry Finn, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Leagues Under the Sea.
Then I got fascinated and I got hooked on to all your Agatha Christie's and the Hardy Boys, Ruth Rendell. I think recently I've read a lot of comedic thrillers. I have also read a lot of interesting thrillers. For example, there's a friend of mine who writes fantastic period thrillers, Arjun Rajgain, the Maharaja Mystery Series. He's written those. I love mythology as well, mythological fiction. I loved medical thrillers as well. So I was hooked on to Robin Cook for the longest time. The last 3-4 years, because I've read so many international names, and of course the usual, the Margaret Atwoods and, you know, the Terry Pratchett's and Neil Gaiman, you know, we've all read these fantastic works, Stephen King as well. But my express intention over the last 3-4 years, and the same I had expressed to my husband as well as my daughter, was of reading Indian authors. So I have been making a calculated choice that every time I walk into a book, I get a lot of books because of my author friends as well. But every time I step into a bookstore, I consciously try and pick up a lot of mixed titles, including a lot of Indian authors as well. So I recently read The Blind Matriarch by Namita Gokhale. Absolutely fantastic. I've read Sujata Massey's thrillers, which are based in Bombay, and they've got again, they're, you know, period his thrillers. So there's so many fantastic writers and so many options that I feel privileged that I live in a world where it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. I get to write. That's an intense privilege, and I can read whatever I want, because I think literature is one space which is all inclusive and non-judgmental. And there should be no pretensions about it. You should read whatever you want, whoever you want. And I don't think I've ever finished. Yes, there have been certain books which I have read faster because I want to finish them. But I can tell you that every book comes from a body of experiences and a point of view. And I think it's definitely worth a read. So I read everything from that point of view. So
I must say, what we discussed, you have read a kind of almost a library, at least a mini library, if not a full-fledged one. So that's really great to know. But coming to Indian authors, so how you think as an Indian author herself, how you think Indian writing has shaped up in the past 10, 20 years? Because when we talk about Indian writing, many people also talk about Chetan Bhagat and when he started writing. And then many other authors joined the foray. And before that, it was like the Rushdies and Amitabh Ghosh and who seemingly did not have books which appealed to the masses. Of course, they are great in their own right, but it did not carry a mass appeal. We had authors like Rabindranath Tagore, R.K. Narayan, or Munshi Premchand, but that was like long back. And we had some Hindi writers such as Surendra Mohan Pathak ji, he still writes, with Prakash Sharma. But how in the last 10, 20 years, how you think Indian writing has changed?
So, Abhishek, I think I was just recently having this discussion on a panel that authors are timekeepers in a sense.
Yeah.
They absorb a lot of what is happening in their immediate vicinity, their own experiences. And what happened for a patch in the middle and for the longest time was that a lot of these writers, whether it was Salman Rushdie or Chitra B. Divakarni, who tends to write a lot of these strong, important female characters and voices in historical
Yes.
fiction, whether it was Jhumpa Lahiri, whether it was Taslima Nasreen, a lot of these were representing the Indian diaspora abroad and wherever it is that they went.
Yes.
So it
Yes.
was, it was a mixed base of, like even Amitabh Bakshi, even. So the point is, or even Arvind Adiga. So you see, this whole bunch of people were, people who have been all around the world and have been writing from their shared pool of experiences. What has happened in the last 10 or 15 years, I think something interesting that happened was when mythological and historical fiction started getting written,
Yeah.
which brought the focus back from what was just being appreciated abroad,
Right.
being appreciated at lit fests and award rounds and all of that, and then
Yeah.
filtering and finding a market back in India. The
Right.
focus turned a little inward, where
Inward.
Amish Tripathi started writing, Chitra B.
Yeah.
Divkarni started writing about, because initially she used to write about generally, again, same matter of subjects. But then she started writing about Draupadi, she started writing about Sita and a whole bunch of other characters. So I think mythology and historical fiction brought it back in terms of,
Right.
the focus back to India. What also happened was, I know there's a whole bunch of people who keep talking about the fact that Chetan Bhagat has bastardized the language. It's not cool to be considered a Chetan Bhagat reader.
Yeah.
And like I just was telling you a little earlier, literature is one world which should be devoid of all pretensions. What that man did was he opened up the doors to a whole bunch of new readers and writers.
And writers.
He made the market accessible to a whole lot of experimental voices, be it men or women. And after that, there was a whole flood of writers that came in. Even Ashwin Sanghi. So this happened parallelly, I think. Chetan Bhagat, Ashwin Sanghi, Amish Tripathi, all of this was happening. Chetan Bhagat happened a little later. But all of this was happening. And it really opened up the market. So not only did it open up and, not only did it, I guess, bring in a new generation of readers who might not be very conversant with the language, but they were still wanting to read English.
Yes.
It also made the publishers think that let's look inward. There is a market for making and for publishing decently priced, economically priced books and find a market within India. Because it's an awful waste of a country and a potential where you're sitting with one of the largest English-speaking markets in the world, and we're not. I mean, there is regional literature, but other than as far as English was concerned, nobody was looking at India, and which was really funny. So then, and I think third important thing that has happened, and there's a lot of women's voices, which brought new readers to the fold as well. So here I'm not going to debate and intellectualize about male gaze, women gaze, or whatever. What did happen was that more subjects got covered, more niches got covered, more taboo topics got covered, and there's a vast variety and diverse kind of literature that started getting written. About diverse communities, about LGBTQ, queer communities, women, all those kind of. So, like I said, so these were these three crucial junctures, I think, in my head, which brought about a lot of experimentation in terms of niches, in terms of reading, as well as writing. And that just opened up the market and presented opportunities to the entire ecosystem. And where they thought, because these commercially, can I tell you that a lot of books that do well abroad don't necessarily make money in India?
Yeah.
So you think that, you've won a few awards here, there, and there, and they're absolutely critically acclaimed and they're wonderful. But it's difficult to market those books, or produce them locally, and those fat books and sell them. And sometimes it doesn't happen. Then when the publishers understood that, look, there's an opportunity sitting right in our country, there are commercially successful authors, whose books are, millions of books are bought, and there's a handful of them now, including women like Preeti Shenoy, there's Durjoy Datta, there's a
Yeah.
Ashwin Sanghi, all of these,
Yeah.
Ravinder Singh, all of them. So then why not look inward? So I think that completely revolutionized the market,
Oh, of
and
course.
these were interesting things that
I think we have lost your voice. Sorry, I can't hear you.
happened in writers. Sorry,
Fine now, yeah.
am I audible
No,
now?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you are audible now. No, of course, I completely agree. That has definitely changed things a lot, especially as we said, Chetan Bhagat and other Indian authors. They changed the entire reading landscape as well as the publishing landscape, I would say. And as I said earlier, the mass writers were less, and now we have more people who are writing for the masses. And many authorities said that they are making Indians read English like never before. So that
Yeah.
is definitely a big change. So any advice for budding writers? You have only 4 books, actually more than 4 under your stable. So any advice for aspiring or budding writers?
Uh, well, I would just say that I get a lot of DMs and SMSs, and I personally believe that I don't think any DM has ever come to me without me responding, or any email has come to me without me responding, because I know what it feels to be in those shoes, in standing there, and
Right,
with that conundrum and trepidation ki koi padega ya nahi, should I write it or not?
right,
So one very common query is, I have to write a book. How should I approach publishers? There is nothing congruent about these two questions
right.
because they are separated by many steps. So if you're
Yes,
writing a book, I keep saying you have to understand your voice,
right.
appreciating something that if for example you like a particular way of an author writes, or a particular genre, that's a good starting point. It'll help you understand what you might be interested in writing, but you
Right.
cannot write like another person. You cannot have another story like that person. So it's
Of course.
important to keep experimenting and find your own voice, and you have to first finish writing whatever you're writing, and then think about publishing it, whether it's a magazine or whether it's to a publisher or whatever it is. That comes a little later on, because I can tell you, I am not seasoned enough to tell you what my Stephen King's book on writing says, that know your IR. There's something called the IR, the
Yeah.
ideal reader. I have no idea who my ideal reader is. I know
Yeah.
people in the family who vet all my stories and novels, but I can't tell you that this is this segmentation. I come from marketing and advertising, and I will be flummoxed, and I can't tell you that how can I do a segmentation of my readers. So you
Exactly.
can never know. You can absolutely not know. So I think it's important to finish the process and pour your all into your writing first, and then put on your marketing hat, which you cannot take off ever after that, because
Of
you can
course.
never divorce yourself from the marketing. But you get to that stage when you get to that stage. If you try to dilute both the stages, then you won't be neither here nor there. Then you'll just be a writer with great intention and a substandard product, and you're trying to
Right.
push yourself out there. There are a lot of people who do it purely with marketing, but I think it has to be a combination of both. You finish your good writing first, then you start preparing your pitch, you start doing your research, and then you put your marketing hat on, and be very,
Of course.
I guess, uh, practical about the way you're trying to sell your book and your
Right.
work.
All right. So one last question, and we'll then open it up for the audience, and all those who are watching, they can write their questions in the comment box, and I'll take it up with Richa. So one last question, Richa, it's out of my personal interest. So talking about your thrillers, and as I've seen in other thriller writers, we have it's largely defined by the characters. So we had Sherlock Holmes, we had Hercule Poirot, we had even for the writers I'm reading with Surendra Mohan Pathak ji, we had this Vimal, Sunil, and lots. So if you were to write more thrillers, would we continue to see Prachand Tripathi, or you planning to bring in some new character? I absolutely love Prachand Tripathi
Hmm.
and your thrillers. So would we see more of Prachand Tripathi, or would there be more experimentation likely to be?
So the Tripathis are now like a family. So I will definitely keep bringing them back. But like I said, I don't think I can ever bracket myself into a set of characters or limit myself in terms of storytelling. So incidentally, the fifth book, the first draft of which I've already finished writing, involves a group of women.
Okay.
So yeah. So I mean, and it's a thriller as well. It's a dark thriller. So it's a
Okay.
dark comedic thriller. So I think the experimentation won't ever end, Abhishek. No matter how much I enjoy a certain set of characters, incidentally, because Excess Baggage went to, is also getting adapted into a movie. I was
Yes.
asked when you're pitching it to potential producers, they always ask you about the longevity of a story, which is why they
Yes.
prefer web series nowadays, right? Because there's a
Yeah.
life for it and you can sell it here and
Yes.
there. So I was asked to visualize that. And the first question I was asked was, do you see, a future for these kind of adventures? Now, there are some stories which lend themselves to more, there are some stories which don't. But, you
Right.
have to constantly, I guess, keep evolving and think that there is a potential for more. Having
Right.
said that, I think I will keep experimenting because no matter how much I love my books and my characters, and I do see a future for most of them, I have to keep because, like I said, there's stimulus and there's interesting ideas all over the place, and I don't want to limit myself. So yes, there's going to be many
Okay.
more characters even within the thriller space.
All right. So I had actually one more question, but that's asked by the audience, that bookworm guy, and his question is: with lots of books getting adopted into OTT series or movies, would Richa like any of her book getting adopted? I think one or two of your books are getting into
Yes. So,
adopted to movies.
Kanpur
So
Khufia Private Limited
yeah,
has gone to Geo Studios, so it's being adapted into a web series.
yeah.
And Excess Baggage is going to be adapted into a movie.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. And my fifth book, incidentally, which I haven't even finished writing, I'm pitching that as well. So let's see, fingers crossed. So that's another interesting thing that's happening because there is a
Yeah,
market out there. It's not, OTT is not just a lease of life for, I think, content creators. It's also the
right,
same for writers, producers, actors as well. And now you can even pitch your script even if the book is not written.
right.
So it purely depends. So yes, a lot of my books are heading that way, and I hope you'll be seeing them on screen soon.
That's great to know. So there's a follow-up question. Also, will it not make her insecure if the character portrayed by an actor does not justify the character completely? Yeah, that's an interesting one. So if you'd
You
like to
mean on
answer this.
screen?
Ah, yes.
So unfortunately, this is a decision that it doesn't sit with me only,
Right.
and there are about 85 to 100 people from this whole process of the contract being signed till the time that
Yeah.
it's delivered to either a web series or this your OTT or a screen.
Right.
So where I do play a part is every time I'm pitching my books, again after the long synopsis, there's always characterizations, and then they ask you who would you recommend. So that
Right.
is when I get extremely happy with myself. I look at all the this whole expanse. I mean, this whole possibility of any kind of character I want, and from Ayushmann Khurrana to Abhay Deol to what's his name, Rajkumar Rao. I think I've
That's
recommended
what.
everyone. Yeah, I have left no one. So that is the point where I make my recommendations.
Mhm.
But then after that, it purely depends on.
It's
I
not
mean,
in.
they do. The contract says that they often they'll come back and discuss it with me.
Right.
But that decision is not in my hand, and I really really
Right.
hope that there is no mismatch when I eventually find out
Yes.
who those people are. So
Who those
fingers
people are.
crossed.
Of course. Okay, so let me check if there are any more questions, or else we can call it a day. So, guys, any other question, you can please write, and I'll take it up with Richa. Cool. So I think there's no. Let me check backwards. If there's no, I guess no more questions. All right. I think then we can definitely call it a day. And Richa, thank you very much for joining. It was wonderful interacting with you, and all the best for your future books. And
Thank
to
you
all
so
the
much,
audience.
Abhishek. And thank you for joining in as well. And yes, hope to see you either at your bookshelf or a movie theater or on OTT, any of the formats.
Of course, definitely. And thank you everyone who has joined. And all right. Thank you, Richa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Bye bye.
care. Bye.
Thank you too. Bye.